Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Fiona Aldridge, Director of Policy and Research at Learning and Work Institute, and I'm delighted to be chairing this event today, thinking about tackling single parent poverty after the coronavirus crisis. Now, as is a common feature of the impact of the coronavirus, rather than creating new issues, what we find is that the coronavirus has highlighted existing challenges and exacerbated previous inequalities. Now, prior to the pandemic, the employment rates for single parents had reached a record high, and yet nearly half of children growing up in single parent families were living in poverty. And so we're here today to discuss new research by Learning and Work Institute and by Gingerbread that's been kindly sponsored by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to explore some of the issues around single parent families and how they've been hit by coronavirus, but also to think about the recommendations about how we tackle this challenge. And I'm delighted to have a great panel of contributors to today's event. I'm pleased to be able to welcome both Laura and Joe from Gingerbread and Learning and Work Institute to share with us the findings of the research and the recommendations for next steps. I'm also really pleased that Laura Croucher, who is a single parent who participated in the research, will be able to talk to us about her own personal lived experience of the crisis. And then finally, that Dr. Rupa Huq, MP, who is chair of the all-party parliamentary group on single parents, will be responding to the findings. It's a great event ahead. We would love you to drop your questions into Slido, and when we come towards the second half of the event, we'll be able to join you in the discussion at that point. The event is being recorded today and we will share it. And then please do continue either on social media or through the question function. Please do join in. We want this to be as interactive as possible. First of all, I'm going to ask Laura Dewar, who's Policy and Research Lead at Gingerbread, just to speak for 10 minutes about the findings of our qualitative research. So Laura, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Fiona. So as you said, that I'm going to be talking about the qualitative research element of the research. I'm going to be talking about Gingerbread for those of you who haven't heard of us, just a bit about us, the approach of the project and the qualitative interviews and workshop with single parents. So first of all, Gingerbread is the national charity for single parent families, and single parents are a significant group. 1 in 5 families with children are headed by a single parent, and 9 out of 10 single parents are women. And Gingerbread supports single parents in a variety of ways, including through our advice and information, our helpline membership and our groups. But we also undertake research such as this and campaign for positive change for single parent families. So it's really important that we get the context of the impact of the coronavirus on single parents and their employment. But it's also a key part of the project was to look beyond the statistics, to involve single parents as to finding out about their experience and what solutions they wanted to see. Single parents really were at the heart of the project. So the purpose was really to explore the reality of unemployment, their contact with back to work services and universal credit. And all the parents were unemployed, either losing their job before or as a result of the pandemic. They were sampled to make sure that there was a diversity in terms of their educational level, the age of their youngest child, and where they were in the country. And 10 single parents were interviewed in September, and then the 11 single parents attended a workshop in October. So the purpose with the interviews was to find out about their experience, and some touching on some of the points around what they wanted to see change. And the workshop was really about developing those changes and their calls for action. So people talk, and you see in the media about certain industries closing and the impact of that. But I think it's important to see that in the reality of people's lives. So Jasmine was one of the parents I interviewed who worked for a leading department store, which has since gone into administration. And she said, I was furloughed up until the beginning of May, and then we got the call. Basically, it was all over the news, so I was just one of the casualties of that. And also single parents talked about working in hospitality and losing their job. Ruth was made redundant because she was a manager of a cafe, and as she was told, as you are front of house manager and we are not opening the cafe, there isn't a position for you anymore. And so one of the themes that are looked at in the interviews was the support that single parents were getting and what they wanted from back to work support. And Alice said, I think they should try to help you find a job that is suited to your personal circumstances, because I don't think it's any help saying, apply for this, but they might not necessarily work around your family. And interviewees had mixed experience of support from work coaches, some more positive than others, but the general theme was there was an inconsistency. So some parents could be told, for instance, that they needed to apply for full-time work when they had very young children, which actually they don't have to do. And they also talked about the real difficulty of finding suitable jobs and the dire shortage of flexible and part-time jobs. And from the workshop, in terms of their things that they wanted to see different, was they wanted consistent information about their rights and responsibilities. They thought there was an awful lot about their responsibilities, for instance, in their claimant commitments and what they had to do, but less about their rights and the flexibilities and easements that there should be for single parents. And they wanted there to be a greater focus on career coaching, to really help have a longer term view of work for single parents. And they really thought there needed to be much more work done on expanding flexible jobs to fit in with their caring responsibilities. And in terms of training, I was struck from the interviews as to how many parents were using the time of unemployment to do online courses to improve their skills. So for instance, Eleanor started a business admin level 2, and Jasmine, who I talked about earlier, who lost her job in retail, was learning, was updating her skills on Microsoft Office. So there was a good understanding amongst the parents that the jobs that they were doing wouldn't exist in the same way, and they were really wanted to improve their skills. But many of the parents in their interaction with job centres thought that what was currently available was just too basic in some ways. So English courses or maths courses, but not necessarily courses that they wanted to do. And from the workshop, that theme continued. So single parents said that they wanted support for longer term training. And they also suggested that any training initiatives that are developed post-COVID really need to be better designed for single parents. Childcare was a really big barrier to single parents in terms of moving back into work and sustaining work. And under universal credit, people need to pay for their childcare up front and then claim it back the following month. And that is incredibly hard for parents. So Grace said, you have to pay first and then you claim it back. I managed to borrow some money from a friend to be able to do that. I understand why people don't go back to work because of meeting the childcare costs. So Grace was talking about the period before COVID when she was working. And another theme from the interviews and actually from the workshop as well was single parents were concerned about the future disruptions to nurseries and schools, including children being sent home to self-isolate, and how difficult it's going to be during the next year for parents to move into work and sustain work because of the childcare disruptions. And from the workshop, single parents really thought that childcare needed to be more integral to the back to work support offered by work coaches. And they suggested upfront funding for childcare costs. And the final theme was around support with income under universal credit. So for those that were moved over who lost their job and were moving over to universal credit, were really struggled with the 5-week wait for their first payment, including Ruth, who was made redundant, who was only able to cope with paying her rent because she had some redundancy money. But on the positive side, single parents, it was a very strong theme with the single parents, both in the interviews and the workshop, that they really appreciated the current £20 uplift that there is to universal credit, and what a massive difference it was making, particularly around the additional costs of food and also fuel costs. And, you know, so they expressed the real difference it had made to them and their children. And in terms of the workshop, single parents wanted much clearer information about universal credit and how much they would earn when they moved into work. That was a really common theme. And very often they might be told about a job, and they just would have no idea as to how much better off they would be moving into that job. So they wanted much clearer information about that. And again, they talked about the 5-week wait needing to be reviewed as it pushed so many of them into debt. And of course, they wanted the universal credit uplift to remain, as it's only committed, the government have only committed to that till next spring. So in conclusion, the interviews and workshops are an illustration of the lived experience of COVID-19 and unemployment for single parents. If the government really want to build back better for everyone, they must take more account of the needs of single parent families. Single parents need much more tailored support to move back into sustainable jobs. Without this focus, there is a danger that single parents and their children will be pushed into deeper poverty. Thank you.
And thank you, Laura, for that summary of the research and those really powerful voices. I'm delighted now that Laura Croucher, who's a single parent who participated in the research, is able to join us. Laura's a single parent with a primary school age son. She's currently unemployed and on universal credit, and attended the workshop as part of the project, and will talk to us now about her own experience. Just to note, Laura has her son with her. He's been sent home to self-isolate, so just bear with her if she needs to attend to her son during the talk. I'm sure many of us can associate with having to do that or seeing it on people's screens. So Laura, thank you very much. Can I hand over to you, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, generally I've done some notes. I mean, just talking about my personal experience of universal credit. So I was actually made redundant a good kind of year or so before the COVID crisis. I was explained to me that I had to go onto universal credit because the legacy benefits were changing. The difficulties I kind of encountered was my work coach was very personable, but there was no kind of direct action I felt in supporting me to actually seek work. And the clear expectation of the working hours. I mean, I actually only found out from Gingerbread that I wasn't expected to work full-time hours because of the age of my son, and that expectation was placed on me. It kind of caused me a lot of stress. There were times I had to bring my child to the job centre, so the travel as well kind of had an economic kind of impact because of the 5-week wait. I was in a lot of debt. I also had issues accessing the journal at times. I don't always have accessible data. I use my mobile data, but sometimes I would log in and I wouldn't always get the messages straight through, or someone wouldn't respond to the messages until a couple months later. And that kind of administrative burden was, again, an additional stress. I also experienced the stress with the childcare, claiming back the costs. So I was constantly kind of incurring the debt, and then you don't always get. Overall, I mean, now that I'm kind of navigating through it, I do obviously appreciate that we have this system kind of set up, because it is a real benefit to have this in this country. But I think there could be a lot more clarity around kind of claimant commitments, and especially being a single parent. One of the things that I felt, I felt pushed to go into full-time work, and I was saying to them that because of my experience in childcare and retail and stuff like that, I would appreciate some kind of relevant training to provide career progression rather than just applying for a job for the sake of having a job. I did work part-time for a period while I've been claiming, and it kind of just got to the point where the amount that I was earning, because there's I think there's this up to 2/3 taken back, you end up working all these hours and then you get a massive deduction at the end, so it doesn't actually work out worthwhile. And then if you're paying for your child to go into after school clubs or additional childcare, it's not sustainable. So I found that a real difficulty. So I mean, when I attended a workshop, I realized obviously there's a lot of parents in similar situations, and some of the suggestions to kind of overcome this, and ways that we could work with the job centre to kind of overcome these barriers, because it's caused me to be in a position where I'm now a year and a half into, maybe even longer, to claiming universal credit, and I was due to start work, and then obviously the COVID crisis has taken place, and that has provided kind of real challenges in, my son's actually off school at the moment because his school bubble closed. So, if you are to start work, and then you have to take time off because you have to look after your child, that's not sustainable. There's also, I'm looking around, there's a lack of availability for jobs that will fit around the hours that my child is in school. So yeah, I mean, these are all difficulties, but I was thinking, it would be appreciated maybe if there could be a more tailored approach with your work coach that could work with various organizations to kind of signpost you or give you information for courses that are actually relevant and long-term sustainability, because I think that's the main thing. Most parents I know want a job not just for the sake of income, but something that's going to provide a career, but also they can be there to raise their child rather than just kind of rushing to and from, and then you get those few hours in the evening, which isn't really enough, especially when your child's really young. I mean, my child is now 6, and aside from trying to navigate through nursery and now through school, there's also I'm also looking into the fact that he possibly has additional needs, and I explained this to the job centre, and I said, my availability, because I have to attend appointments and stuff, I didn't feel like they were very understanding when my expressing that situation, it kind of impacts on the way that I'm having to do my work search. So I tend to kind of tailor emails and stuff, and I look through every couple of days, but my claimant commitment states that I have to kind of fill in the journal constantly. I don't have literally the time or the data access to do that. So I was thinking maybe if they could tailor specific emails for jobs that would be relevant to you, and then you could somehow kind of interact with each other, like a more kind of holistic approach, like working with the council, working with other organisations that are involved with you as an individual to support you getting back into work. Maybe apprenticeships for older people, because I know I'm kind of past that 16 to 24 age. And I think just giving you kind of autonomy and real meaning to actually seeking work, rather than just, I feel that sometimes you're just viewed as a kind of tick box and a number, not an actual individual person when you're looking for a sustainable job. I think it needs to be a bit more transparent. I feel like the payments when you're first claiming should be upfront rather than you having to apply for a loan, because I'm still paying back various loans. Like I'm constantly having to kind of borrow money, and then that gets deducted and you get to pay back. So each month I'm trying to calculate exactly how much is going to come out. Yeah, and I think overall the main thing that I really struggled with is the inconsistency. Like right now I don't even know who my work coach is, so that's a real issue. With the COVID crisis, it's clearly worsening, and it's looking like we're probably going to go back into another lockdown. That I find extremely stressful. I find it actually kind of having an impact on my overall mental well-being, because as much as I've worked since I was 16, I have a strong work ethic, I do want a full-time kind of career to be able to support my child. But I have real concerns in actually going into a workplace where I don't know if, that long-term job is sustainable, or if, you go into a lockdown period again, that, if I haven't been in long-term employment, would I get furloughed, or would I have to go back to claiming, and then would I again have to wait and then be in debt? So overall, it's a really, really stressful situation. But hopefully, going through this, if we have, various points put across, we can kind of work together to improving universal credit, particularly for single parents. I think possibly I've covered most of my points. Yeah, I don't think there's really anything else.
Yeah, no, that's great, okay. Laura. And thank you for sharing with us so eloquently both your experience, but also the kind of suggestions you have for how the system might be improved. So thank you so much for that, and hopefully you'll be able to join in the panel discussion. For those of you who are watching the webinar, if you have a look in Slido at the minute, we have a poll with a set of questions. It'd be really great that as you're listening to Jo, who's speaking next, if you could answer that poll question, and we'll share the findings later on. But Jo, could I ask you to talk about our findings from the quantitative research and the recommendations coming out of it?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you to Laura Dewar for highlighting the findings from our interviews and our workshop, and to Laura Croucher for talking about your personal experiences. Thanks also to Rupa for joining us, and to Gingerbread for working with us on this project, and also to JRF for generously supporting the project. I should say there's a loft conversion going on next door, so if there's some banging, please forgive me for that interruption. As Fiona says, I'm going to sort of talk through the findings of the quantitative analysis for the project. So I'll talk a bit about the pre-crisis context, so the situation before the pandemic in relation to single parents of the labour market, and I'll then go on to talk about the impact of the pandemic on single parents and our recommendations. So this slide shows that while single parents have long faced significant labour market disadvantage, there's been a remarkable success in boosting single parent employment over the last couple of decades leading up to the pandemic. So single parent employment increased by 22 percentage points, from under 5 in 10 single parents to over 7 in 10 in work on the eve of the crisis. This increase was much more rapid than among other parents and among the workforce as a whole, and the single parent employment gap, the gap between single parents and other parents, fell by over half in the 2 decades running up to the pandemic. But as slide 2 shows, whilst more single parents than ever were in work on the eve of the crisis, we could just go on to the next slide, Mincha. Whilst more parents were in work than ever, many parents remained stuck in poverty on the eve of the crisis. Mincha, can we go to the next slide, please? And this is partly due, I don't know if it's just my slides that are stuck or if it's everyone else's, but I will carry on. This is partly, there we go, that's the slide. This is partly due to the type of work that single parents were doing. So single parents are much more likely to work part-time. So over 50% of single parents work part-time, compared to about 1 in 4 of parents in a couple. Of course, for many, this is not a free choice. Single parents who do work part-time are much more likely to want to work more hours or to want to work full-time than coupled parents, but they're constrained by the availability, flexibility, and affordability of childcare. Single parents are also much more likely to be in low-paid roles. So this is partly related to the part-time pay penalty. So as Laura Dewar said, there's a dire shortage of high-quality part-time jobs. And average hourly pay for part-time jobs is 1/3 lower than average hourly pay for full-time jobs. This graph comes from previous Learning and Work Institute and Gingerbread analysis, which shows that single parents are much more likely to be stuck in low pay. So 1 in 3 single parents who are in work were earning below the living wage in 2 consecutive years, compared to 1 in 5 mothers in a couple, and 1 in 12 fathers in a couple. But in addition to the type of work that single parents do, this is also about the impact of the social security system and cuts to the levels of benefits. So given single parents often work part-time and often face higher housing costs, many have to rely on in-work benefits to support them even when they're in employment. And the generosity of these working age benefits has been significantly reduced by a 4-year freeze from 2016. This means that while single parent employment had increased in the last decade and more single parents than ever were in work, single parent poverty was also increasing. And JRF have found, for example, that the fastest increase in poverty among any group in the labour market in the last decade has been among working single parents. So that's the situation that we went into on the eve of the crisis. The next slide, slide 3, shows that the situation before shows that single parents have been hit hardest by the pandemic. So we looked at analysis of 2 large-scale national surveys, Understanding Society and the Family Resources Survey, and we found that single parents have been hit hardest across these 4 areas. So they're more likely to have seen an impact on hours, jobs and income. They're more likely to have been furloughed. They've seen a bigger impact on their already stretched household finances, and they're more likely to be fearful for the future. So I'll just go over briefly each of these in turn. Slide 4, the next slide, shows that the impact on hours, employment and weekly pay for single parents. So as you can see, single parents are in orange. They saw the largest average impact in hours worked, declining by a quarter or 7.6 hours a week. We also saw a significant employment impact between February and June. This is on single parents, with 9% saying that they lost their jobs, and also a reduction in pay. The reduction in pay is less than the reduction in hours, in large part due to the impact of the coronavirus job retention scheme, which has protected people's incomes during the crisis. The next slide, slide 5, shows that single parents are much more likely to have been furloughed during the crisis. So the furlough scheme introduced in March allowed employers to put workers who weren't able to continue working on paid leave effectively. And this shows that 1 in 3 single parents were furloughed, compared to 1 in 4 of coupled parents or couples without children. Whilst this helped mitigate some of the impact of the crisis, we're concerned that the end of the scheme, which is due to end at the end of March, when the economy is likely to still be struggling from ongoing impacts of the pandemic, could lead to a second wave of job losses for single parents in the new year. Slide 6, the next slide, shows the impact on household finances and hopes for the future. And what this shows, again, is in orange, single parents, there's been a much greater impact across all of these areas than coupled parents or couples without children. So it shows that single parents are much more likely to be struggling financially, they're much more likely to be behind with their bills, and they're 3 times as likely to say they've had to rely on a food bank compared to coupled parents. As it also shows, 1 in 5 single parents expect their financial situation to get worse still. Slide 7 sets out why we think single parents have been hit hardest by the pandemic. So what explains this pattern in the data where consistently across all these areas single parents have been hit hardest? So we highlight what we call a double whammy that's impacted single parents during the crisis. First, while many have suffered from the jobs crisis, single parents are much more likely to be working in the types of jobs that have been hit hardest. So Gingerbread has shown, for example, that single parents were more likely to be working in the sectors that have seen a bigger jobs impact, and they're less likely to have been in the sort of jobs where you can carry on working from home. And that's why more have lost their jobs. But second, also, whilst all parents, a large majority of parents have really struggled with disruption to childcare, single parents have suffered a greater impact from this. So as sole carers, in most cases, the closure of childcare and schools and the disruption to vital informal childcare networks has really hit single parents hard. And in most cases, they've had to sort of bear that impact alone rather than being able to share childcare responsibilities during that period. Slide 8, the next slide, shows our recommendations. So as with many areas of the pandemic, the crisis seems to have exposed and deepened pre-existing inequalities. So while single parent employment had reached a record high, too many single parents were in poverty and were already struggling before the pandemic. The pandemic has gone on to hit this group hardest, and without action, we argue that inequalities will deepen and more children will be pushed into poverty. So if we want to build back better, we think this means that we need to ensure less poverty in the post-pandemic labour market than before. And we call for a 4-point plan to tackle single parent poverty after the coronavirus crisis. As Laura Dewar said, these recommendations were informed by the experience of single parents through the research, and they were developed along with single parents as part of the research. So the first recommendation is about ensuring high quality employment and skills support. So the work programme, which was introduced following the last recession, was actually comparatively more effective at helping single parents into work than other claimants. But too many of those single parents who were helped into work remained in poverty. So it helped them into work, but not out of poverty. We need to ensure that the support provided both through Job Centre Plus and through the new Restart scheme focuses on helping people to find good quality work and supporting people to progress in work. So as Laura said, rather than just getting a job for the sake of a job, we need to focus on job quality and progression too. Single parents have also told us, again, as Laura suggested, that they need work coaches to take a mentoring and supportive approach to really understand their childcare needs, to understand available childcare support, and to help them find a job that fits around their childcare. The second thing that we recommend is a real focus on boosting the availability of high quality, flexible and part-time jobs. So providing excellent employment support alone is great, but it can only get you so far. You need the demand side there. You need the good quality, high, decently paying, flexible jobs. And this is particularly important for single parents who are much more likely to need to work part-time and flexibly. As Laura said, there's a real lack of jobs that fit around childcare, and those that do all too often tend to be low paid. So we think the employment bill could be have a major role to play here, and we welcome the plans to require employers to advertise jobs as flexible by default. We also think that government should go further, including reviewing public sector employment to ensure that we're doing as much as possible to maximise the opportunity to work flexibly in the public sector. Third, we need to invest in childcare support. So we heard from single parents that paying up front for childcare was a real barrier, and we heard that from Laura as well, and that it pushed many people into debt on entering work. So we argue that DWP should cover this cost upfront for the first month through universal credit. We also call for the 30-hour childcare offer to be extended throughout the year, and for a review of the caps on the cost of childcare, which in too many areas do not reflect the market rate of childcare. And in terms of childcare as well as being something that supports people to access work, we can also think of this as a demand measure. So it's a measure that can create good quality jobs that can also be accessible to single parents as well. And finally, even if we boosted single parent employment, even if we increased the availability of high quality flexible jobs and improved childcare, we would still need to provide support through the social security system. So as JRF have shown, boosting the minimum wage is no substitute for investing in social security, and cuts to working age benefits have meant that alongside an increase in employment, we've seen an increase in work poverty in recent years. We heard from single parents that the £20 increase to universal credit introduced at the start of the pandemic was a real lifeline for those both in work and out of work. And as JRF has shown, if this was withdrawn at the end of March, as is planned, it would mean an additional 200,000 children being pushed into poverty, many of them coming from single parent households. So we call for the £20 increase in universal credit to be made permanent and to be extended to legacy benefits. We also call for the 5-week wait to be scrapped so that claimants can get payment from day one and they don't have to go into debt and pay back out of future payments. Those are our proposals. Thanks a huge amount to all of the single parents who work with us to help shape them. And I really look forward to taking your questions later on and to hearing Rupert's reflections.
Thank you, Jo. That was really, really helpful. I'd like to go on to our final contributor, Dr. Rupa Huq MP, to ask her just for 5 or 10 minutes before we go into a full discussion, essentially to have your response to that, particularly thinking about what we need to do to tackle some of these challenges that have been raised. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. No, that was really interesting stuff. Before I did this job, I used to be an academic in sociology. So, I mean, from what I've heard, this was all the hallmarks of really top class research is action research, because it's going to inform what happens in the future rather than just sitting on a dusty shelf somewhere. It was mixed methods. So it was really good to hear Laura's input, the two Lauras actually. But the fact that you've got qualitative actual people's voices as well as the stats, the quants. And, you know, official statistics move so slowly, don't they? We have a census, every 10 years? And we've seen in coronavirus, things are changing really, really fast. It was Harold Wilson, he said a week is a long time in politics. In coronavirus, you know, in 9 months, look how much has happened. So I just want to show you some pictures. Hang on. Just to go with, just to really inform you what it is that the APPG does. Can anyone see that yet? Is that showing up for you guys?
Yeah, that's fine.
It is, right, hang on. How do I get rid of that blooming, I want to do, yeah, right, move that thingy. Right, sorry, just some pictures of sort of what the APPG does. And what I've noticed as an MP about what coronavirus has done in all this. I mean, look, a lot of the things people were saying about the fact that the working poor is becoming more and more of a phenomenon, that a lot of these trends that were already in place have been accelerated. Look, I'll skip through these. I'll just show you the pictures really. Jo also mentioned, and Laura Dewar, this phrase, building back better. It's turned into, it's so overused, it's on the point of becoming a meaningless cliche, but we do need to take things from this. So, you know, what was originally a health crisis has now hit every aspect of all of our lives. We now know London is in tier 3 from today. It's become an economic crisis, all of those things. And that has hit single parents hardest of all categories. Just some to show what an MP does. This is a picture with Eddie Izzard in my first election and my son in there. People know it for PMQs, you know, this is half an hour on a Wednesday. It's a very, and that's what it looks like from our side, small amount of what we do. But, you know, with coronavirus, even our workplace has changed. This is sort of, now we're sort of limited who's in there with social distancing. And that has put enormous pressures on every type of workplace. And we've seen the unemployment figures this week, worst ever, the highest ever number of redundancies on record. And we know from the stats we've seen, it's single parents who've been hit hardest. And I think this is one of 3 big economic events. We had the crash a decade ago. And then actually Brexit, there are studies that show Brexit hits single parents and women in general harder than anyone else because of the type of employment they're in, because of the childbearing responsibilities that are done solo, that you know, a lot of assumptions are made. So look, this is just a list of things I've done in Parliament. The single parent family APPG, what is that? All party parliamentary groups are a bit like, I don't know if anyone's been to university at Freshers' Fair, you can start a society for anything. So the serious ones are the select committees where they have a power to subpoena witnesses and do reports, whereas you can make an APPG on everything, on anything you want. So I was surprised when I got to Parliament in 2015 to find there were the APPGs on curry, on cider, on hang gliding, every kind of esoteric thing, but no one had ever done one on single parent families. And Gingerbread actually wrote to me and pointed out the number of single parent families in my seat exceeded my majority at the time. And it's a thing that we often say, that kind of, if we have men who are the decision makers, they don't take into account women's interests at all. You know, if you, and so with single parents, and Laura pointed out 9 out of 10 are women, all these things are exacerbated. So, I mean, look, these are some of the campaigns I've been involved in. With that APPG, all party parliamentary group, we have Lords, we have MPs, and we have people from across the aisle, different political parties, including Conservatives and SNP. We've been working with Gingerbread. But again, the way to get, I find, in a sort of situation we're in with a Conservative majority of 80, to get change, sometimes it helps to do things cross-party. So, you know, as a Labour Party person, I'm quite tribal, and I think like a Labour person, but reaching across, which is something that, again, coronavirus has showed more of a willingness than was there before. So we work not only with Gingerbread, but the Centre for Social Justice is a right-wing think tank. It's the Ian Duncan Smith one. They were a bit suspicious of us at first. We put the word family in it rather than single parent APPG to show that it's a natural conservative value, the family. Families come in all shapes and sizes. You know, it's increasingly the norm. It's not something that should be stigmatized like it was in earlier decades. Deal with it, kind of thing. So they came on board when we stressed the word family. A group called Dad's House we also work with. They approached us. At first I was a bit suspicious. I thought, are they Fathers for Justice, who I believe have had a relationship with Joe Dromey's parents, Ruth, before. I thought, I hope they're not those scary people. But actually they work to empower male single dads, the 10%. So yeah, sorry, this is a picture of a select committee. So, you know, they're sort of jury style, but even those who've changed now, they are conducted rather like we're having this meeting now. And sometimes, you know, something you say in one of those can end up in the paper without you knowing it. I know that this is the Evening Standard gossip column. When we had a reception for Day of the Single Parent Family, the Standard came along, and then they reported the quip of Paul Masterton, a Tory MP, who said, when I joined this group, my wife worried, what am I doing? But it's not meant to be for single parents, it's to advocate for those policy changes that can be forgotten when you have a parliament that's stuffed with 650 grey-haired men in grey suits. And, you know, don't get me wrong, those people are completely valid, and some of my best friends are those, but, you know, until you have an appreciation and understanding. So it was in the 2017 general election when a bunch of, that was the unexpected election, sort of like-minded single parents also got elected, and we decided, let's have an APPG on this. It's never been considered. Sorry, this is just to show you get in the media when you're an MP. Look, just a few pictures on disparities, and then I'll finish because I'm only meant to be short. I think coronavirus, as we've said, has exacerbated a lot of things that were already happening. So shuttered up shops on high streets, you know, from a range of different things. Black Lives Matter. So again, if you're in a Venn diagram that you're a single parent and a minority, we know that minorities have been dying disproportionately, BME people. The Black Lives Matter movement, that was a demo in Acton, we're all taking a knee for 8 minutes, 47 seconds here. That was the one that we had in Ealing. Not all the people who came were black, probably a minority of them were, but it's an important cause that we, you know, cannot ignore this year. You even see it in suburban houses, the posters people have DIY'd. So, you know, this disadvantage can come in a Venn diagram where you're many things at once. This is a Black Lives Matter Zoom. So again, these meetings, we have them sometimes outside, sometimes. Right, I was saying that we have the ear of government more during coronavirus than we ever did. So every time there is a tier decision, we tend to have a Zoom, or in fact, they're Teams, I think. But anyway, we tend to have a video conference with a minister to explain the changes. We had a daily call with the Cabinet Office Minister throughout the very first lockdown. And I've been able to get myself in to see Matt Hancock with David Davis. So this is what I'm saying. If we work cross-party, if we're able to get our allies from the other side, we can change things. And this was my campaign on vitamin D that first came to my attention when I did a lot of interviews around BME people, because BME people are deficient in this vitamin that is UV rays on the skin, darker skinned people. But it turns out everyone in this country, because it's a dark and dingy place. Anyway, as a result of that, it looks like from January, vulnerable people will be prescribed vitamin D. Just some more pictures. You're all aware of these things. People on this call are juggling childcare at the same time. So, you know, women always bear the brunt of child rearing responsibilities. When you're a single parent, then all the burden is on the one person, homeschooling as well as doing your Zoom call. No wonder we've seen these memorable incidents on our TV screens and 24-hour news. The kid who was negotiating 2 biscuits when his mum was talking about Hong Kong law on Sky. The other one who was rearranging her unicorns on a shelf, her mum, a public health professor. And this idea children should be seen or not heard, that, we're embarrassed by our kids making it. Mine is at school at the moment, so I'm okay on that. But yeah, it's something that single parents, who are just exhausted at the end of the day. So often these things seem to be afterthoughts as well. So when we are on a Zoom with a health minister explaining this is the new rule of 6, the question has to be raised, what about grandparent support bubbles? So for single parents, grandparents, I have no parents anymore, so I can't claim that one. But they do a lot of the childcare responsibilities, and we're told that generations shouldn't mix. We know that the isolate, test, track and trace regime we're meant to have had still wasn't sorted out in that last lockdown. Means that people are scared to put the app on their phone because they know they won't get anything if they're off work, and they need to be able to eat. So, the government really needs to sort out sick pay. And we talked in those previous ones about precarious employment, 0 hours contracts, and key worker people. That's a reason why there are a lot of BME deaths. When we saw the first pictures of the doctors that were dying, we did think, hang on, all their pigmentation is the same, isn't it? It's because a lot of BME people, a lot of single parents as well, are in public facing jobs where they are more susceptible to the virus. So there needs to be some sort of plan in place. If there's BME staff, take them off the COVID ward, put them on something else. You can read all that faster than I can read those out. All these new words that we've come used to, a new phrase we use every day, you haven't put yourself on mute, that kind of thing that we'd never heard. We'd never heard the word coronavirus a year ago. Algorithm, government by algorithm. Apparently they've dropped the planning algorithm we've heard this morning. But the damage it did to kids with their exams. Again, there are big issues with schools. It's already been raised. When your kid's class is isolating and they have to be at home, then what support do you get as a single parent to be in with them all the time? That was a column from the Ealing Gazette on the exam thing. Trumpification, there's so many examples that we could use of this. But just the historic way that the word single parent has been a category of people to demonize people that get free council houses, which is just complete rubbish. We've heard from Laura that just normal people who want to participate in the workforce. Brexit, that's a whole other thing. But again, we've got a very damaging Brexit to come, it looks like, even if we do get a deal. We don't know if there'll be a deal yet. This is all very 11th hour. That's what the reality of it will be. So there'll be a mighty economic shock anyway. And the reason that they haven't extended transition or anything is they're hoping it will all be mixed up in coronavirus. Nobody will notice. But, as has been said, these cliff edges, we've heard that the £20 top up is to go in March. And we keep reaching these cliff edges, like when the furlough scheme was meant to end. And as I say, I think a word should be said for the key workers who've been working throughout all of this. When other people, it's assumed everyone's been furloughed to the sofa and watching box sets. That's not the reality for everyone. It's only a certain kind of job that you can work at home with a laptop. Other people don't have that lifestyle choice. Other people don't have the technology necessarily. The laptops were not delivered to schools. This is just the old Coke advert. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. We're told we should build back better. So, let's make this a reality. Let's reform our benefit system. There's so many issues with it. The 3-child limit is something that, King Herod would be proud of. Inhumane. The churches have all condemned it. The benefit cap, the bedroom tax, cuts in tax credits, benefit freeze, all these things. And, it just seems, bizarre what we've seen in this last 9 months. And probably the person that's affected the most political change really is Marcus Rashford with his school meals campaign, isn't it? So anyway, one could go on and on, but I'll stop there. I think
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you. I'm conscious that we have a few questions, and I'd like to invite the panel to come back onto the screen. But also, Mintra, could you share the results of the poll with us? So we asked you as the audience to identify which of the recommendations that Jo talked through do you think would make the biggest difference? And what you can see, significant support there for that first one around high quality, flexible part-time jobs, including requiring jobs to be advertised as flexible by default. So I wondered if I could start with that. So how do we make that a reality? Jo, you mentioned that when you talked about the recommendation. What's the role for government in making sure that we can have flexible employment, and who else needs to be brought in, and how do we do that?
Well, I mentioned it's good to see that one come top, actually, because I think we all too often ignore the demand side and the availability of the jobs and focus instead on supporting people into jobs which may not be there. So I think creating those high quality, flexible part-time jobs are vital, both for single parents, but also for other people who can't work full time. I think I mentioned the employment bill. So the government's bringing forward an employment bill and have talked about requiring employers to advertise jobs as flexible by default. So it's kind of switching the default and requiring all jobs to be advertised as flexible unless there's a kind of compelling reason not to. I think that would be great because as Timewise, for example, has shown, despite the progress that we've seen in flexible working in recent years, still only 1 in 5 jobs are advertised as open to flexible working, when in reality, many, many more could be done flexibly. But we also talked, for example, about the government thinking about what role public sector employment could do here. And this is about kind of practicing what you preach and ensuring that public sector employment offers opportunities for flexible, high quality part-time jobs rather than just full-time jobs. I mean, I say this as slightly selfishly, as my partner's a parent, my partner's a teacher, and we've recently become parents and has been told it's not possible to work part-time in her job in the public sector. And clearly it is, and it's a mindset thing. So I think practicing what you preach and having high quality jobs part-time through the public sector would be a great thing alongside the employment bill.
Thanks, Jo. Laura, I'll come on to you, but I want to ask you another question as well. So maybe you answer both of those. There have been a few comments in the chat about the Restart programme. So the new programme that's been announced by government to support people back to work. What would you like to see built into that would specifically provide support for single parents?
Well, I think it was touched upon. So the Restart programme hadn't been announced when I did the interviews and did the workshop, and we know the sort of the bare bones of the programme. I suppose it's about seeing that that the needs will be different for single parents, and children grow up. So the advice that you might give to someone when their child is 4 might be very different than when their child is, say, at secondary school. But there has to be an understanding that the job that you get them into when their child is 4 is going to make a real, difference to them. So, for instance, if someone, used to do a managerial job and then they sort of go and they work in a school, as an assistant, it's going to be very hard for them to move on from that as their children get older. So I think some understanding of that understanding of thinking about that person in front of them and their future, not just that particular moment in time. And also childcare. So it's no good having a Restart programme, it's no good having training, no good having those things unless childcare is built into it. And for instance, currently, if you've got a child aged 3 or 4, you can have your job seeking turned off for up to a year to train, but you're not actually eligible for the 30-hour childcare offer if you do that. So it's those things. It's having a joined up thinking and thinking longer term. And in terms of the points that Jo has made about flexible by default jobs, I think the employment bill is really important. It keeps being delayed, keeps being put on the back burner. So important. And not only that jobs are advertised as flexible by default, but that's enforced. and that there is some way of looking at that legislation and how it bites is really important. And also the DWP has something called a Find a Job site, which lots of single parents are pushed towards when they are job seekers. And I think that site really needs to be revamped. There needs to be jobs on there. So say like Laura Croucher, she has her son who is 6, so she has to work. Her claim of commitment probably says that she needs to work up to 25 hours. Well, where is there on that site the jobs that are 25 hours? Why don't they list those jobs? And also perhaps incentivize job shares on that site. So if an employer needs someone full-time, maybe incentivize. There have been lots of initiatives for younger people, but what about for parents? What about incentivizing job shares? Because then that can be a way of someone having greater seniority in a post. So yes, thank you.
Rita, can I just ask you briefly, thinking about the work across the APPG, what's the one thing that you would like to see happen that you think would make most difference to employment and skills support for single parents?
I mean, I think the childcare point, which was one of your 4, is crucial, really. But Laura makes a good point that at different stages of life, that will maybe take different forms. I mean, things like breakfast clubs and after-school clubs, again, they're kind of like gold dust. Maybe, I don't know, there should be an automatic right or priority for parents to use those kind of, single parents to use those kind of facilities. I mean, other stuff we've campaigned around is, some of them are a bit esoteric. The women's name on the birth certificate, on the child's passport, because that's the thing. If you're bringing a kid back in this country and you've got a different surname to them, I mean, that's not a major employment one. So, I mean, yeah, we've campaigned on lots of different issues kind of thing. But
Right.
I think childcare is pretty central, because that's why people are parents. If they were not, then it wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura Croucher, if I could just come to you, don't worry about your son being with you. That's just part of family life, isn't it? What's the one thing that would make most difference to you?
Sorry, you cut out. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, what's the one thing that would make most difference to you?
Could you? The one thing, to be specific, it is long-term sustainable employment that would actually be tailored around childcare as well. Actually appreciating that, to me, it's my priority is raising my son, and then my next priority is obviously having a decent income, but a job that is worthwhile, because you spend a lot of time at work as well, so you need fulfillment in your life as well as being a parent, if that's kind of one point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we are really grateful for actually being able to hear
Sorry, my
your
connection's
story
really poor, so I'm hoping this is coming across.
It's really important that we hear your voice in all of this. So can I say thank you to all of the contributors, to the panel, for everybody who's participated by sending in questions. Please do take a look at the report and share it with others. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.